Okay. By the way, where are you?
I am in Gloucester, Massachusetts, which is uh, 35 miles north of Boston. I'm on the Atlantic Ocean.
And we know
50.
where everybody knows where Gloucester is. It's world famous and historical and all the rest of it. I'm speaking with American composer Philip Swanson, and we're going to talk about Phil's 2019 MSR Classics release CD, Aviary. Sorry, I've got some traffic noise. Birds in Poetry and Song, with baritone and friend of yours of many years apparently, Gary Wood, and we'll talk about Gary, and you, Philip Swanson, trombonist, are at the piano, and it drives, as I mentioned to you before I push record, it just drives me crazy when I have people with that kind of talent. It just really makes me feel very depressed and awful. I'm kidding, but it's fascinating how people, you know, come upon instruments. Here's what I want to do so I don't wander off too much. Once again, Aviary, Birds in Poetry and Song. That's the idea of this CD. That's the focus. And the cover is, of course, a bird. You'll get all this stuff on the, and if that was dumb of me, that's like saying, oh, that's a dog. Undoubtedly, the cover feathered creature is something specific, yeah?
That's it. That's,
okay. It's just never. We'll go there. We'll get through it. Here's just for everybody to understand. Again, this is piano and baritone. Gary Wood is a baritone. I'm very interested about that. Some I think it seems to me rather high tessitura on a couple of songs of his, and so he's got this very very light higher range. It's wonderful. Here are some of the tunes. I'm a classical musician, and I just said tunes. You've affected me with, what's coming at the end of the CD. 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, poetry by Wallace Stevens. It's, as I mentioned to you off camera, it's like, when do I have 12 years to live all alone in isolation and figure out what the hey 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird by Wallace Stevens is saying. Great Gray Owl, poetry by Annie Finch. Beautiful, beautiful words, beautiful use of words, and the way you make use of sounds to adapt to these words. That's why I'm so curious about the 13 Ways, because the texts are so esoteric. I'm thinking, where do you pull notes from? We'll talk about it. Wild Swans at Cool, with the beloved Yeats, who brings us back down to real words and real imagery. Yeah. I'm being cruel. And then there's this piece by Silva, Skylark, Mercer. I'm using the composing ranges. Baltimore Oriole, Carmichael, and it goes on and on. Ladybird. What I'm getting at is, we've got on this CD your music, your own music, original music, very intelligent music that speaks to where you have been in terms of training, Oberlin, Eastman School of Music, etc., New England Conservatory of Music. And then you say, okay, now how about everybody relax and we'll just show you what else we can do. These are fabulous songs. A Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square, and so on. So that gives everybody an idea of the CD. Are you eager to jump in, or shall I finish?
Yeah, game.
Okay.
No,
okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This came about. Well, I've always, speaking of the classical and jazz idioms, my life has been in both. My father was a musician. I grew up around music, and there was music. Sometimes it was jazz, sometimes it was classical, but I grew up in that environment, immersed in that environment. So I started playing piano and trombone, both, studying throughout grade school and high school. And I'd always felt very comfortable in both idioms, so they both seemed not like different, they were just musical languages, which I was very comfortable speaking. So often you'll see people in one world or the other, but I've always inhabited both. So this particular project, um, as I said in the liner notes, the Yeats poem moved me deeply. Um, and so I just found myself setting that. Like a lot of, I didn't have a preconceived notion. I enjoy setting art. I like writing art songs. I like poetry, and as a pianist, I'm comfortable with that idiom. And I've always admired, the Copland's, Emily Dickinson songs, and the Barbara Hermit song. I just adore that repertory in Britain. So I'm very drawn to it. And I wrote this without any kind of preconceived plan. I set the Yeats, and then I thought, I wondered, that was about the birds. I wondered, I had the idea of maybe of a series of songs based around birds. Not that I'm a big bird person, but it seemed like a way of putting something, together. And so, yeah, 13 Ways, the Wallace Stevens. I mean, that's pretty heavy duty stuff. If in a word, what I could say is it's about perspective. It's about different ways of looking at something, and that that we're all familiar with. I see this, now it means that. So he's just, to me, that's kind of the underlying feature of this work. And what attracted me about it was because there were so many vivid images, and not some kind of super profound meaning, just actually just kind of different ways of looking at something, like um, that. And they were so vivid and beautiful, like a haiku in nature. Kind of like a haiku poem, which is the last
You
thing
took
I
the
just.
words right out of my head. Haiku. I've written it down, and so I'm glad you
Yeah,
beat me to it.
yeah, because actually this last fall I just finished a set for alto of Ryokan, who's a great 19th century haiku poet. Um, um, but so this seemed like, oh, these images are so different. It kind of gave me an opportunity to use different voices, different language systems almost. Um, and so that drew me to that. And it's like, okay. And I just kind of started on it. And they suggested images. And I did have Gary, who was my colleague, I had his voice in mind. As you said, he has a light, he's primarily a conductor, but he's also a wonderful baritone. And I also, so I kind of wrote these with him in mind, and they're not easy. It's tonal, but it can be pretty, it's out there depending on
Wait,
the poem. And then
let me just jump. Let me
I
just
found
jump
that
in.
Annie, yeah, yeah,
Let me just jump in because esoteric is kind of the word I'm using. And remember, I have no problem. You have no problem as a composer. We don't have any problem with this. But it is a curiosity to me. You having just said, I'm speaking of 13 ways of looking at a blackbird
yeah,
with poetry by
yeah,
Wallace Stevens. Just because, again, I spent the day with this CD. I would need to spend several other days, but that's what I'm so curious about is how in this esoteric format you come up with colors and stuff. But we're going to talk about that a little more detail when we get to specific pieces, if that's okay with
sure.
you. But I guess I presume you and Gary sat down and charted out what you thought you might put in the CD or whatnot. How did you come up with this
Well,
end program?
yeah, yeah, what happened was I had written these two, and then uh, I thought this was still just me, writing these. And I said, Gary, I'm working on some stuff, and have a look at it. And he was, we teach together, so yeah, that works. And then the Annie Finch poem, which is really quite lovely, and that's set more. I always liked Alec Wilder. He was kind of in between classical. He wasn't quite like writing 32 bar song forms, but it was a very accessible language. So that, and being drawn to jazz, I don't, these two come together for me. And so I put that one in, and then I said, Gary, I've got these uh, three songs. And it's like about 35 minutes of music. There's a song cycle. But I said, and Gary is very, very unusual in that he sings art songs, and not many people sing jazz like he does either. And I knew he did. We've done gigs together, right? And I said, Gary, let's find a bunch of songs about birds, like tunes. So I said, well, Skylark's obvious, and the Nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. And then he said, well, do you know the tune Baltimore Oriole? It's like I'd never heard of it. I said, cool, let's, and he said, go listen to this recording of it. And it's like, cool, that works. Oriole's a bird. So it kind of came collaboratively in picking, I think, four jazz tunes. And since we both speak both languages, we ended up with this. It seemed like we're showing both sides of ourselves, but again, it kind of evolved through a process. That wasn't the initial plan. Like, let's make a CD with classical, and we weren't even do that. But I'd already done 6 CDs with MSR of varying types, trombone, classical, jazz. And so Richard Price, who's digital, he's a fabulous recording engineer. He came for a couple days, and we just laid this stuff down, and then that was the project, and it was a great deal. It was a lot of work, but a very, very satisfying project.
And I'm glad you gave us this kind of overview, because of course I interview people who create CDs, and those of you and I know that this ain't in the backyard saying, hey, let's make a CD. It's like, oh, now we have to find the funding, and then we have to choose it, blah blah blah, and the cost, and it just goes on and on. So it's quite a project, and then also there's a legacy involved. This is as I mentioned, this is the 2019 CD, but it'll be around for years to come. So there's that I know must go into your head when you finally say, okay, let's do this. You must be thinking, aren't you, or not, of a legacy?
I just want to leave. I think any creative artist or anybody it's like I just want to. It's like saying, hi, I was here. I was on the planet for a while. Here's some of the stuff I'm going to leave. Here's a little. This is something I have to say, and it's my language. And my own feeling is, with all art, if it's whether it's popular or sells a lot, I could care less. That's not on my radar screen. It's not why I'm doing it.
And by the way, it's not. It doesn't need to be in terms of art music. Come on, let's be clear. In other words, you are not trying to make
absolutely,
put on the new bathroom edition based on income from this CD as everyone else.
That's for sure, and it doesn't enter one's mind. And but my own feeling is with the music, it's like very Darwinian. If it's of good quality, it'll last. Why are we listening to Beethoven or Mozart or Schubert and not like 300 other composers who were? So you just put it out there, you leave it, and that's it. You try and be as honest as you can and speak in as honest of a way as you can, and express it and give it care and attention, and then you just send it out there. Forget the bird analogy, but you just send it out there. And,
that was good.
That was planned. Things here, you start talking about birds, and there you go. So, but that was kind of the genesis of that work, and we've performed it, which is the point. We've done it at school. We've done sections of it, and that's it.
So it was time to get it permanently in place, if you will, in terms of on CD. Just because
Yeah,
you had performed this repertoire before and so on. And we are going to talk a little more detail about some of these pieces, but I'm glad you gave me that overview, and then just the serendipity of somehow birds come up, and then hey, let's get to blah blah blah, and pretty soon you got yourselves a CD, and
yeah,
a very interesting CD too. Again, baritone piano.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For those
Yeah,
out there who are thinking, hey, let's see, what's this stuff about for my forthcoming recital kind of thing.
yeah.
Let alone if anybody has a club date coming up, because you do Baltimore Oriole beautifully, Carmichael, Webster. Here's my confession, because it'll help eat up a couple minutes here. And it I was I always look at what I guess what I'm trying to say is I am uh, we are both in the same age area. How's that for discretion? And my journey was like straight and narrow. I'm a conductor, you know what I mean? My teacher, and there's the repertoire and all that. And I just went that way all this time of my life, really. I've only started to mellow out a little bit in my old age. But you, who are in the same kind of baby boomer generation as I am, somehow you, because of your family and the exposure you had, absorbed all this stuff. And in my case, my family really wasn't very musical. So once I decided it's conducting, that was what I did. Concentrating on the orchestral repertoire. But yeah, I've been a little jealous. I can whistle in the shower, and that's about it. I can't improvise at the piano, let alone on clarinet, which was my instrument during my college years, to save my health, my future. Um, so I just want to make sure that I consider it extraordinary when people are lucky enough, as you are, to have had this broad commingling and mixture of experience. Okay, here's something. Are you there? We may have lost you. Let's go back. Let's put that on.